This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
All these scripts, if it wasn't for CGI, they would all still be on the shelf. And as long as you don't abuse it, then it's just a great thing. All those scripts, starting with Twister, if those guys didn't come up with that tornado, that movie wasn't going to get made.
It goes without saying that visual effects have come a very long way since the beginning of film. When we look back at the history of cinema, the 90s in particular was a time period where we really began to see the potential of visual effects. Spielberg was never one to shy away from making the unbelievable believable on camera. From Jaws to E.T. to Indiana Jones, Spielberg constantly found creative ways to portray phenomena.
You know, I've gone into every film thinking, I've never done anything like this before. How am I going to pull this off? How am I going to make this work? Which is in a way very good.
But in 1993, Spielberg turned to ILM to bring dinosaurs to life in his film Jurassic Park.
Boy, no, I hate being right all the time.
Industrial Light and Magic, or of course ILM for short, was founded in 1975 by Spielberg's good friend, George Lucas. And by 1996, their list of films was quite impressive, including recent films of that time such as Casper, Jumanji, and of course Spielberg's Jurassic Park. So it was no surprise when Spielberg called ILM asking if it had the ability to craft something new in the world of visual effects, specifically a tornado. The challenge was this: it had to look real and it had to be terrifying. It's one thing for a friendly ghost to not look believable, but tornadoes are haunting, horrifying, and if it didn't look real, you'd never be able to present an audience with true terror. And so in a decision that would have made Christopher Nolan cry, Spielberg turned to CGI. This was the beginning stage for the film Twister. While most movies begin with a script or at least an idea of a story, Twister was a film that began with a visual. The 90s were not a time when you could simply pitch a studio on the idea of a movie about a tornado without showing proof that you could pull it off. Steven liked to have us do tests for things that hadn't been done before, said Stefan Fengmeyer, the project's VFX supervisor. He called ILM and said, "Can you guys do this?" So ILM went to work.
So the whole idea was, if we could prove to the studio that we could make those effects and make them look real, not just like a little wind machine and then hopefully it looks like a twist. At the time, nobody had ever done those effects.
Dennis Muren, the creative director of ILM, had recently worked with Spielberg on Jurassic Park and Casper, and would get tapped to head up this project.
I was working with Dennis Muren on Casper, another Amblin production, and Steven Spielberg had approached Dennis Muren to do a test for Twister, which Steven always likes to do. We did one with Habib Zagapur, a guru at Industrial Light and Magic, who also became sort of my right-hand guy on Twister.
Muren headed up a test shoot in Northern California, while ILM's Habib Zagapur worked to animate millions of particles into a funnel cloud.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this was photographed, the barn and all the people are real, but obviously the tornado was put in there. And the thing that was also interesting, there was no blue screen involved, which was fairly unusual for the time. Later on for Twister, there was no blue screen or green screen used in any of it, zero.
While they had their test shot, they still had to figure out how to create this tornado with visual effects through particle systems that had not been created at this point in time.
You know, ILM had done surfaces before, like the surface of a dinosaur, and this required particles, and not just a few particles, just millions and millions of particles.
I was basically creating particles out of statistics, forming some volume. He compares it to packing together little scoops of ice cream.
And that gave us a great tool to author those particles. And then we needed a way to render these particles. We didn't even have a way to render particles back then. A lot of these tools exist today out of the box.
When all was said and done, Spielberg and John Fraser, who would go on to work on the special effects for the film, watched Muren and Zagapur's work at Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment.
We did the test and showed it to the studio, and they loved it.
Fraser was so impressed by the test and was surprised to learn that the tornado was created not in camera, but on computer.
It was so dynamic that people wanted to use it for the trailer and to market the movie.
Kathleen Kennedy told Wired in 2015, "The minute we took that shot into the studio and they saw it, they said, 'Done. We want to make it.' We didn't even have a script yet."
The script wasn't even quite finished yet, but when they saw the shot, we have to do that, and we have to do it now.
Today's sponsor, Squarespace, has just updated to Squarespace 7.1 with its Fluid Engine and newly added Blueprint, AI, and SEO tools. It's the easiest way to get a professional website for your business up and running for anyone who doesn't have a lot of time to, mess around with complicated coding. The new Blueprint AI system helps build your website from the ground up, tailoring it to your specific business and industry. And instead of having to install a bunch of SEO plugins so people will actually see your site, the new optimized SEO tools will help launch your site and get seen fast, with integrated and optimized SEO tools that will help your website grow fast. So head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial to test out these awesome new features. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/FrameVoyager to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code FrameVoyager. Initially, it was Spielberg himself who was slated to direct Twister. At other points down the line, James Cameron, Tim Burton, and Robert Zemeckis were also attached to the project, all who turned it down. Eventually, the studio settled on Dutch cinematographer Jan de Bont, who had just made his directorial debut in 1994 with the Keanu Reeves film Speed. De Bont had a solid resume up to that point, having lensed such films as The Hunt for Red October, Basic Instinct, and perhaps most notably, Die Hard.
Thanks for the advice.
At this point in his career, it seems that de Bont was still being a bit selective, coming off of the success of Speed, and he was frustrated by the terrible scripts he was receiving. De Bont stated, "A lot of writers in Hollywood seem to think if you have some explosions and a car chase, you've got an action movie. So when you see a script like Twister, you grab it." De Bont's eagerness to take on the film may also stem from the project he had just walked away from, Godzilla. After the studio deemed the production to be too expensive and wouldn't give de Bont more money to work on the project, he left, making the way for none other than Roland Emmerich. The irony here is that a large chunk of the Godzilla budget controversy came down to the cost of visual effects, something that would not be an issue for Twister. One of the challenges that de Bont faced with the writers was that in some of the earlier drafts of the script, the action scenes and the dialogue scenes were separate. As de Bont said, the idea of this movie was that the action events are taking place in the background of dialogue scenes, which the sentiment is perhaps most prominent in the hail scene, which brings incredible exposition to Joe and Bill's relationship.
You've never seen what that thing can do, so don't talk to me about it. You've never seen it!
At one point, Tom Hanks read for the part of Bill. Hanks, of course, passed, moving on to write and star in That Thing You Do, his directorial debut for film. Although Hanks turned down the role of Bill, he recommended Bill Paxton for the role, having recently worked with Paxton on Apollo 13. Production would start for this film in May of 1995. Rather than the modern approach of filming on a soundstage, de Bont chose to film on location in 4 different areas across Oklahoma, with a few scenes that they would shoot in Iowa. De Bont was quoted by Vulture magazine saying that Twister was quite possibly the last great action movie not shot on a soundstage. And Twister is better off for it. The CGI of the tornado was a necessity, but the real-life locations helped to keep the film grounded. No pun intended there.
Really the big thing about Twister that people might not realize, the way it was photographed was really quite freer than visual effects before were really done. So all the things where we had to put the tornadoes behind the running people, it kind of comes down to digital paint work where you kind of rotoscope. It's very hard work, but I think it was absolutely necessary to make this film seem real, that you really were there.
And to make this process more complicated than any other film before with visual effects was de Bont's desire to have the camera not be locked off on a tripod, creating some challenges for the VFX team to overcome to give the film the right look.
The most difficult thing in those days is what people don't remember, is that originally when you make a movie with visual effects in those days, you put the camera on a tripod, you lock it off, and you make very little pans. You cannot get a sense of danger and action and incredible change, quick changes if I cannot put this camera on my shoulder. We made a lot of tests while we were shooting and see if we could do it.
But real locations bring real challenges, also real opportunities. While filming was taking place, the crew faced numerous tornado watches.
Sometimes for days we could shoot like maybe 1 or 2 shots.
And you'd be shooting, all of a sudden you get a tornado warning, and if it was within 5 miles of us, you got to bring down all the cranes and all the lights, and you got to stop.
We had so many vehicles just to pull trucks, trailers, camera equipment out of mouth, and it was horrific.
And just a month before filming took place, a federal building in Oklahoma City was bombed, killing 167 people.
The chaos in downtown Oklahoma City did indeed resemble Beirut after what police believe to be a 1,200-pound car bomb ripped through the 9-story federal building.
Bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on innocent children and defenseless citizens.
Many of the crew and cast were involved in relief efforts and benefits that raised funds for the victim. When they returned to filming, the rest of the project went smoothly with no issues whatsoever. Well, except for the time that Bont knocked over a camera assistant who missed a cue, and then had to replace his cinematographer, Don Burgess, who walked off the set with his crew, because Jan de Bont refused to apologize. And de Bont really did deserve some of this criticism, constantly changing the direction they would be filming, and then getting angry at the crew for taking too long to switch, saying, "These crews get paid well, and when they screw up, I'm going to call them on it." After the entire crew walked off set, Spielberg would fly in the next day to confront de Bont. Mike Rogers, the stunt coordinator, recalled the event saying, "The ramp came down on the Learjet and Spielberg walked down. He just stood there yelling at Jan. He never even got off the plane. He was just yelling, pointing his finger at him, screaming at him. I don't know what he said to him, but he barked at him for like 15 minutes and got back in the plane. The plane left without him even stepping off. Jan de Bont seems like a real nice guy." Then there was a time where, after replacing Burgess with Jack and Green, Green was injured in the collapse of a hydraulic house set. So then de Bont had to finish filming as his own cinematographer. Oh, and then there was also the time that Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton were blinded by on-set lighting and contracted hepatitis. Yeah, outside of that, almost everything went smoothly. Some other interesting practical effects they employed for the shoot had to do with jet engines, utilizing the engines of a Boeing 707 to get their wind just right for the tornado scenes.
One of my responsibilities as a visual effects supervisor is always to work very closely with a special effects supervisor, and that's the person who does all the practical stuff on set. And John Fraser was just a great guy.
The wind machine that they had was a 707 jet motor mounted on a 40-foot truck with another 40-foot container above it to push debris into it.
I said, "How about that big one over there? What size is that?" They said, "Well, that's a Boeing 707. That sounds good. I like the sound of that." They fueled it up, fired it up, and I said, "Okay, I'll take 2 of those."
Also, there were a ton of driving shots through the rain that they needed to capture, and instead of doing it in a studio environment with blue screen or green screen, they would film it for real, traveling down the road with a 400-gallon water truck.
We did a lot of traveling rain shots where we had 3 vehicles, and the lead vehicle was a 4,000-gallon water truck. Then we had the insert car that had the camera crew on it, and then we had the picture car, which was the big red truck. We hooked all of them together, and the water truck pulled everything.
But despite using practical elements for parts of the film, they would resort to CGI when objects became too big.
When it actually sort of tumbles across and then just sort of lands smack on the road, that is, of course, computer animated, because there's no rig that you could use, even a huge crane or whatever, without immediately destroying the house. There was a practical house that actually was put on the street. The truck drives into it.
The front of the house was upright, but the back of the house was upside down. Well, the truck drives through the front door, but when it comes out the back, the house is upside down. So it looks like the house has done a 360 degrees revolution, when in reality, it never did anything.
As we know in film, it's not enough to look real. A film has to sound real as well. And to create the sound of the tornadoes, de Bont used a combination of lion roars, tiger growls, camel moans, and jet engines.
I really felt very strongly about creating different sound effects for each one. And we started recording lots of different sounds. I made a gigantic library of sound effects. Breaking boards, big like crashing cars into walls. And ultimately, all those things mixed and slowed down and mixed together, we started creating different effects.
The film made $41 million in its opening weekend, earning the 6th largest opening weekend of any film up to that time, and it ended its successful run with a box office return of $495.7 million. And keep in mind that with the budget for this film was roughly $90 million, so it's a quite substantial budget at the time. most notable about its home release was that on March 25th of 1997, Twister would become the first feature film to be released on DVD. For as many challenges as Twister faced, it certainly left a remarkable legacy behind, paving the way for CGI and action films. It's a film that has cemented itself into film history, and perhaps Twister is more than just a movie. Perhaps it is a landmarker for where the future of film itself took an unexpected turn.
It was really a proud movie to work on because it started the realization, everything was real. You didn't have to do something fake. It looked real.
There are many films that come and go, but some films leave a mark on time that we may not fully comprehend in the moment that it happens. And Twister is a reminder to us that films, like a tornado, are not simply here today and gone tomorrow. Rather, they often leave an enduring mark on our world. But someone that also left an enduring mark on our world is director George Miller. Find out about his fascinating career from Mad Max all the way to Happy Feet right here. Just click on this video right here.